Hello and welcome to my channel where I take a look at acrylic paint and all the colors that you can use with acrylic paint. Now today I'm comparing two different tubes of paint that the manufacturer claims artists can't tell a difference. Also, my cat has come to join us. Liquitex claims the artist can't tell a difference between these two tubes of paint. And there is one difference though. This one right here has real cadmium in it, and this one right here is free of cadmium. So what's the big difference between, or what's the big deal about cadmium? So cadmium is very beloved by a ton of artists, both acrylic, watercolors. I'm not sure about oils because I don't use those, but it is a very opaque color. It has a really high tinting strength. That means you just need to use a little bit and you get a lot of color. And also it's just a really, really bright, clean color. And cadmiums, there's a range of different cadmiums you can get, but all the cadmiums are really on the warm side of the color wheel. So it ranges from yellow to really deep reds. So you can get different yellows, different oranges, different reds. So let's talk about why cadmium free. So the reason why some people want an option of a cadmium-free paint is that cadmium is a heavy metal, and some people do not want any sort of heavy metal on their acrylic paint palette. Some artists are not concerned with it at all, and they will always choose cadmiums. I'm kind of in the middle. If I have an option, I'll always choose the cadmium-free version, particularly the Liquitex cadmium-free line, because it is so close to the original versions. But I'm obviously not overly concerned if I do have it on my palette because I use gloves. I'm very careful of having food or drink around my paintings while I'm working. And obviously I picked up this one by accident, and I'm going to use it till it's done, and then I'll try and replace it with a cadmium-free version. And then you'll see later on when I show my color mixing sheet, I have a cadmium orange. And that is because when I went to buy a new tube of cadmium orange, they were out of the cadmium-free version. So I ended up with a real cadmium again. So let's talk for a moment about cadmium red medium, the real cadmium. So this is labeled as PR 108, and good quality artist paint manufacturers will list the pigment code so you know what you have. It's a really beautiful, really opaque orangey red color. Now cadmium-free red medium, interestingly and very controversially as well, Liquitex does not list the pigment codes. They say it's a proprietary formula and that's all that they'll say. And that is very controversial because some artists believe that they should know what pigments that they're working with. That is so that they can predict what the color mix will be. If you're buying it off the shelf, you don't really know. All you have is this printed color swatch, and that's all you know. The other thing is you don't necessarily know if a manufacturer will keep the same formula over time, and it might change, and you won't necessarily know. And I think this is a fair criticism because, I'm not extraordinarily picky about my color mixes, but I do expect to have some stability in the tube of paint that I purchase, and I do want to be able to see what am I actually getting. Now obviously not enough for me to not use this cadmium-free line, but I do hope in the future that once they have had this line out for a while, they do start adding the pigment labeling. And then because it is meant to mimic the cadmium red medium, it's also very opaque and a beautiful bright orange-red color. Now on the back of the real cadmium, it does say that the product does contain cadmium, which is a chemical known to the state of California to cause cancer. And then on the cadmium-free red medium version, it just says it's a non-hazardous formula. Now another thing that is interesting, I guess we could say, about this cadmium-free red medium, interesting is an interesting choice of words for what I'm about to say, it is just as expensive as the real cadmium. Cadmium paints tend to be on the more expensive side. They'll be one of the more expensive tubes of paint that you buy. And this cadmium-free version is just as expensive. So you're not going to save any money. So really you're either just going to like it as a paint or you're going to like it because it is free of cadmium, but has the qualities of a real cadmium paint. Now, before I start on the actual comparisons, just a quick note about other cadmium mimicking paint formulas. You might find tubes of paint that say cadmium red medium hue. When it says hue, it's not the real stuff. So it's not a real cadmium. It's other paints that are meant to mimic a cadmium red medium. Those do tend to be less expensive. I find that they haven't been amazing. You know, that might mimic a cadmium red, but it misses one aspect, whether the color is just off or the opacity is off. So anyways, don't consider cadmium-free red medium to be similar to a cadmium red medium hue. So let's do some color comparisons. I've done a color mixing sheet, and I'll show you different portions of it as we go through this video. So the colors on the left are cadmium-free or cadmium red medium. So this is the real cadmium. And the colors on the right are the cadmium-free version. So let's just talk about straight out of the tube. So this color right here and this color right here are each of the tubes of paint straight out of the tube. Very, very similar. You can see I put a black line in underneath so we can see the opacity. And this cadmium red, the real cadmium red, looks a little bit more opaque, but I think that's just because I have a little bit more on this piece of paper than the cadmium-free red medium. And because, I'm not able to make sure I have exactly the same number of micrograms of each color of paint, I can't necessarily get it exact. So we just kind of have to go by feel and know that they might be a little bit different. And some of these differences might just be because I have a bit more on one swatch than another. So as you go to the right, it gets lighter because I've added titanium white, and same with cadmium-free red medium. And as you add more titanium white, it gets kind of this, kind of orangey red, bricky-ish pink color, and very, very similar as you add titanium white to them. Now let's look at the two yellows. So I have a cool yellow and a warm yellow. And as we talk through these color swatches, the colors on the left are where I have more of the mixing color, and the colors on the right are more of the cadmium red medium or cad-free red medium. Now, if we look at the yellows, very similar between the two, the real and the cadmium-free versions. Hansa Yellow Lemon is an extremely transparent color, and cadmium and cadmium-free are quite opaque, but still quite transparent if you're just using a touch of the cadmium color. Same with cad-free. And then if you want to make your cadmium or cad-free a little bit transparent, you could add a touch of the Hansa Yellow Lemon, and that can help as well. And cad-free yellow medium, this is a cadmium-free that I've been using for years as well. Because you have an opaque, you get some quite opaque colors. And then, these colors on the right of each swatch, I've added a bit of titanium white. So, and again, titanium white is also quite opaque. So you get, opaque, and then even more opaque versus opaque, transparent, add a bit of titanium white, you kind of get two opaques and one transparent. So just as you're mixing and painting, that's something to be aware of, and how you can use your different opaque and transparent colors together. Now I only have one red mixing color, and that's quinacridone magenta. That's because it's more of a blue red versus the orange red. That is the cad and cad-free versions. Now I like using cad-free red and quin magenta together. And of course the cad red, the real cad. I like using them together because the orange in the cadmium red medium and the blue in the quin magenta, they are opposite on the color wheel. So those undertones can really mute down either the cadmium red or the quin magenta so that they're not quite so intense when you're painting. So you still get this really beautiful colors, not dramatically different, but you can just kind of make them a little less intense as they are straight out of the tube. And again, of course, these mixes are very, very similar. So let's look at our two blues. We've got ourselves our warm blue, which is ultramarine blue, and our cool blue, which is phthalo blue green shade. I like using either the cad or cad-free red medium mixed with either of these blues to make beautiful, beautiful dark shadows. And then you can add a touch of titanium white just to bring out the color a little bit more, because it can be really hard to see what you've just mixed because it can be so, so dark. And again, very, very similar. These ones also it's hard to judge the opacity on these because we have a black over black. That's just the nature of different values of colors. And then dioxazine purple, again, very, very dark color. You can add a bit of either the reds and make, you know, more of a reddish purple, or just kind of mute down the intensity of the dioxazine purple, add a bit of white, and you can get these different shadow colors. And again, very, very similar mixes. Let's look at sap green hue. Now green and red opposite on the color wheel, which means you can get a really nice brown, or you can add just a touch of the red to the sap green and just give yourself another variation on sap green, so something that's a little bit more olivey. And again, very similar mixes on both. And cadmium orange. Now cadmium orange, very close, it's right next to cadmium red medium on the color wheel, so you're not getting a massive difference, but it's really nice to make your cadmium orange a little less yellowy and make it a little bit more red. I also really like using kind of a more red orange when I'm doing florals, because you can get a nice kind of orangey coral color. Now, one of the advantages of a real cadmium and what is being mimicked with the cadmium-free version is the tinting strength. And I found as I worked throughout this mixing sheet, very similar tinting strength. I didn't have any issues where one of the tubes of paint was just stronger than the comparison color. So cadmium red medium, cad-free red medium, very similar tinting strength. And then opacity, you can see very similar opacity through all of these different colors. So again, tinting strength is very similar and opacity is very similar. Another similarity, obviously, with all of these is just the way that it reacts and mixes with other colors, other pigments, is very, very similar as well. So let's quickly look at this painting that I sketched, these two paintings that I sketched this afternoon. Top one uses the real cadmium red medium, and the bottom uses cadmium-free red medium. And they are a bit different, and that's just me painting and not being too perfect about it. But I found as I did both of them, the paint applied the same in both. I found the tinting strength as I did my mixes, they're very, very similar. I could not feel a difference as I used either of them. You know, I had to do similar color mixes for both. I had to do similar layering for both. Again, they're not exactly the same, like this cadmium-free red medium, the background is quite a bit darker. I actually ran out of blue paint on my palette and didn't want to squeeze out more, so I just left it as is. But overall, I just found very, very similar, not any real difference between the two. So as I said earlier, I've been using the cadmium-free paints for quite some time and prefer it if I have the option. And now after I've done this comparison, would I make the same choice? And the answer is yes. And it's because I still don't see the need of having a heavy metal on my palette if I have an option that has the same benefits that is free of a heavy metal. I do wish Liquitex would label with the pigments, because I do want to know what the pigments are. I want to be able to see if it's, 20 years down the road, if they're still using the same pigments. There have been cases in the past where a certain pigment is no longer being manufactured, and then the paint manufacturer can no longer manufacture certain colors of paint. I want to be able to know, is it the same paint when I'm buying one tube to the next? And pigment labeling would help with that. I also wish it was not as expensive. I've never really been happy with any of the cadmium red medium hues, and that's because I just don't think that they really mimic cadmium colors as much as a real cadmium, and this really does. But I do wish it was less expensive, because cadmiums are very expensive. So there you go. Which one would you choose to have on your palette? The real stuff or the cadmium-free stuff? That's up to you to decide. And you're not going to save any money by using the cadmium-free stuff, which is a little bit disappointing, because I love having a less expensive tube of paint, but I also really like having certain properties of a tube of paint. So I do really like my cadmiums and do think it is worth having, springing the money for, in my case, the cadmium-free version. Now, if you want to hear more about different acrylic paint colors, comparing very similar colors, very different colors, seeing how they mix together, subscribe to my channel, because I'll have a ton of other videos in the future.